guys, Julia here. Just a quick note off the top. When we recorded this episode, there was a helicopter hovering directly above our apartment. And so the first 2 minutes of audio sound a little wonky, but right around minute 3, it gets a lot better. It corrects. So just hang in there. Apologies for that. Thank you so much for listening and enjoy the episode.
Welcome to Book Club. I'm really into fun facts. Julie has an endless array of pop culture knowledge. Overall, I would say I liked it.
Something about the way she writes is like really concrete and immediate. Who is this man? Why is he in this costume? Why did he drop a squid? You teased some juicy deets about the creation of this book.
This is, again, what Victoria finds interesting, not what is actually most important about these people.
What stories are we going to tell ourselves about this year?
Welcome to the party.
Welcome, guys.
Welcome to Book Club
With Julia
and Victoria.
We are two roommates and friends since high school who read a book and talk about it each episode.
This is a podcast where we explore new perspectives and use books as a tool for personal and community growth.
This week, we are talking about Untamed by Glennan Doyle, and we will be talking about the entire book. So, if you are a person who cares about spoilers, this is your official warning.
And for anyone who hasn't read this book, we're excited to talk about it with you. And for those who have already read, please chime in on your thoughts. We have some strong opinions, I would say.
Yeah,
we're excited to share. Welcome to the party.
Welcome. Yeah, definitely some stronger opinions this time around, for sure. Not just unbridled enthusiasm.
Well, a lot of times when we pick books, it's one that one or both of us have already read, and so we usually have a notion of how much we enjoy the book. Yeah. Whereas this one was okay, we've had the book on our shelf, it would balance out our season, we haven't done a memoir in this style. Just so many people were talking about it last year and into this year. It's on Instagram everywhere because it's just such a beautiful cover that I was like, sure, let's do it. What the heck? I have a copy from a friend. So it is a little change of pace for our listeners who are usually used to our enthusiasm 5 out of 5 stars all the time for the books that we read.
That's true. Even books that neither of us have read, Invisible Women, which I feel like we're going to be hyping so much. We are both so excited to talk about this book. And it's in months from now. It's just, we read the description and it was just so much exactly the type of book that we like to read and the type of subjects that we love, that we were just oh my god. And so far it has not disappointed. Whereas this one, we shouldn't go with Instagram famous books. I think that's the moral of the story today.
Overall, I would say there's definitely big themes, certain passages, certain storylines that I really appreciate this book, and I think there's some good stuff in here that I personally will hold on to. Some metaphors. Glennan Doyle loves metaphors.
So many mixed metaphors.
That I think will really stick with me. But do have, I also was I'm not in complete awe over the book.
No.
I think it's also one of those things when someone hypes something too much, you have really high expectations. If I had just picked this up and didn't really know anything about it, I'd be oh, this is, there's things I really like in here. And then I would have just moved on with my day. But because it was the book of the year, it felt in the corner of Instagram that I inhabit, I was a little let down.
Yeah, I knew even less about it than you did. Because you said you saw everyone was reading it. That was not the case for me. I had never heard of it or her. The way it was introduced to me was, I think it was Natasha talking about oh, there's this book where this woman is married to a man, and then she just sees her wife in the crowd and she's I'm gonna marry her, and then I don't know, that was what was pitched to me, and I was I'm on board. I want to hear about a housewife discovering her sexuality. That sounds like a great time. And what I got was mommy blogger, spiritual guru kind of situation. And I don't know, like with the type of advice that she was doling out, I really wanted her to have some degrees or something, you know, because if she's talking about shame, in my mind, I'm comparing her to Brené Brown immediately. Mm-hmm. There's even a Brené Brown blurb on the back, right? So I was kind of turned off by that, and I was confused. Like, I got the story at the beginning, and then she turns off into this other direction. I was like, oh, hang on. This was not the book I signed up for. But at the same time, it's an incredibly easy read. You can pick it up and put it down 1,000,000 times a day and get something out of it. But yeah, I was mostly confused and a little disappointed, which we'll get into momentarily.
Yeah. Glennan Doyle is, if you're not familiar with her or her work, she's an American author, activist, and mother of 3. She was born in Virginia and had a difficult upbringing. She developed bulimia and lived with a lot of anxiety and addiction. She touches on this in her writing. And in her 20s, she and the person she's with at the time, they get pregnant, and she's like, oh gosh, what do I do? And that was kind of her impetus to get sober and seek help. She becomes a mother. She and her partner Craig, they get married. They have 2 other kids. And in 2009, she starts a blog, the Momastery. It's like monastery, but moms. I don't know how to say it. I think it's Momastery. Is her blog. And garners a lot of readers, specifically in the mom audience, and specifically in like the Christian mom space. And from her blogs, she publishes, this is now her 3rd memoir. So the first one came out in 2013, another in 2016. And while she was actually promoting that book is when she met her now wife, Abby Wambach, which she writes about here in this book in 2020. So it's been like only a handful of years between the events of some of the stories in this book and when she's writing it. Some of it feels very like real time. Yeah. All of her books have been big hits. Untamed has sold more than 2 million copies as of February this year. So in less than a year, it's sold 2 million copies. So that's a little bit about Glennan Doyle. I'm going to go in super in depth because her writing is so much about her life. Right. So I'm sure we'll touch on parts of it too. Okay, so when Julie and I sat down to discuss, like, okay, what are we going to do on the podcast today? Yeah. We really just kept coming back to this question that we want to play detective with. Mm-hmm. What is this book?
What the heck is this book?
What is it? How's it written? Who's it for?
What's it about?
What's it about? So we're going to dive in and try to feel through what we think it is. Yeah. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. If you absolutely loved it, we'd love to hear reasons why. Mm-hmm. And if you also are critical of it in some similar ways that we are, we'd love to hear your thoughts too.
Yeah, if you're a member, it's a little plug. If you're a member, and you can like comment on the things that we post on the member page as well, and we will be more likely to see them. Yeah. Or if not, totally fine. You can also DM us or comment on this episode post.
On Instagram.
On Instagram! Right. Don't just DM us on a platform we don't use.
If you DM us on Twitter, I do not know who that is. Yeah. I do not have a Twitter.
Cool. Normally I would do a book summary. Mm-hmm. And I was like, how do I even summarize this book? And we kind of sat there for a minute and I was like, I don't even know what this book is. Like, I think I just want to talk about that. Yeah. That's the story, you know? It's like, we don't know what it is. I don't know if the book knows what it is. I don't know if Glennan Doyle knows what the book is, you know? She seems to be very much a person who writes not even as she's living it, but as she said, before she lives it. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like the person who, like, writes about a breakup that happened yesterday and they show up to poetry class with it. And you're just like, this is very fresh. And I think maybe you should take a few days, talk to your friends, have some crying time, listen to Taylor Swift, and then, like, you know, come back to class and we'll tackle it together.
Yeah, it does seem really fresh, but part of me is like, is it just like the most true expression in her writing of what she's trying to achieve in her life? But we'll dig into it.
We'll get into it.
This podcast is made possible by our fantastic book club members. You can support the show by becoming a member on buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv. Starting at $3 per month, book club members can connect with fellow listeners, help us select books for future episodes, unlock exclusive posts and messages, get early and discounted access to future events, and more. And if you want to take your support to the next level, you can join the TISM tier, which starts at $5 per month. The TISM tier is all about autism. Are you an autistic person looking for community? A possible neurodiverse person looking for resources? Or an ally hoping to learn more from an actually autistic person? Members of this tier get free access to Julia's autism-related articles on Medium. The best part of any book club, besides the books, is the community. So join us in our growing community of book nerds by becoming a member of the book club today. Follow the link in our show notes or go to buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv to join the party. That's buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv. We'll see you there. So, how is it written? One of the first friends that talked to me about this book said she particularly liked it because there were short sections, she could just read a little bit before bed, and it worked at a pace that she was, like, very comfortable reading with. So yeah, the book reads in 3 parts. Technically. It does not feel like those are the appropriate 3 parts.
No.
There's kind of an introduction section that's more of the story of her and Abby meeting, giving some context and background on her life, her struggles with bulimia and addiction. And yeah, Julia was telling me, like, after that first section, you're just, like, hyped. You're like, I'm here for it. And then the second section is what she calls keys.
I did not like this section. I would like to be on the record. I did not know what it was. I did not understand it. I did not enjoy it.
Which I also felt a little, where are we? What are we doing in this section?
Yeah.
But when I, like, looked at the pages that I usually dog ear the bottom corner when I'm like, oh, I have something I want to, like, come back to here. That section had the most bottom corner dog ears for me.
All right.
I think there's some nuggets in there, and I think what she's trying to do with this structure is start out with the memoir narrative part, and then give these, like, foundational pillars, quote unquote. I'm using that loosely. It's a word I came up with, not a word she uses.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, like, keys to understanding, or, like, these really, like, for her, like, foundational things that she came to understand about herself and the world. And then she takes those keys, and then in part 3, which is the bulk of the book, applies them to various experiences of life.
Very liberally.
Without direction. And then in the ending, we do get a couple more, what feels like, wrapping it all up.
Yeah.
More back to that narrative, stories of family life. That, honestly, that's what I'm here for. Like, those stories, like, tell me those foundational things you learned through your stories. Don't tell me them up front and then give me a bunch of stories, because I'm still trying to figure out what the heck you were trying to get at with that.
Yeah. This is a classic show don't tell situation where she tells and then she shows, but she doesn't do the telling through the showing, if that makes sense. And so she the scene towards the end of the book where her ex-husband and Abby are on a soccer team together.
Oh, I love that section.
That was the best! I was like, this is what I want. This is the story that I signed up for, where, like, and then there's this old couple sitting next to them, and they think that the kid's dad is married to, and she's like, no, I am, and it's like, the old people are like, scandalous. You're just like, yes, amazing. I love all of this supportive, like, complex family that's kind of making it work, and that's great. But we just got that little taste of it at the end, which was not... There was so much of the book in the middle that I was like, where are we going? And the thing with the keys is because she introduces the concepts before you get the story. She basically gives you the end of the book at the beginning and is explaining the major themes of the book before you see how she learned these things. Mm-hmm. And it's all pure metaphor. It's so abstract that she just gets into this certain layer where you just don't even understand what she's saying anymore. And, like, because she's a good writer who I think has genuinely learned these lessons, there are some good nuggets in there. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, you're just like, I don't even know where to, like, we need to land our feet somewhere. And she never really lets us do that. You just kind of feel like you're free floating. And it's really disorienting. And I think it's because it's written like a blog. Mm-hmm. It really feels like she copied her blog in the order that she was writing them. You know, because, like, blogs kind of jump all over the place, you know, and they might jump to different topics, and, you know, each individual piece was decent and was, like, something that I would, you know, if someone sent it to me, I would, like, read and think about, and on a Tuesday morning. A whole book of them? Oof. It was too chaotic for me.
Yeah, the pacing, while I agree with my friend who was like, oh, it's really great to read in small sections. I totally agree. If this was just, like, my bedside book, and I read, like, a section every night, or 2 sections maybe that's the approach that she expects her readers to have, not the, you know, very niche approach of, oh, I have to record a podcast about this on Friday, and I just started this on Sunday, so I guess I'm reading 55 pages a day to make sure I finish this in time. So I don't think she was writing for me.
Definitely not. Definitely not.
In that scenario. But speaking of, like, writing for me.
Yeah.
Who do we think this book is for?
Oof. Yeah, definitely not us. We are absolutely not the target audience. I mean, I think we're tangential to the target audience because we are white women who follow book people on Instagram and are formerly very involved in the church, but I think I made a comparison. It kind of, to me, felt like 2020 feminine mystique. Except with the fun twist that, like, she's queer, you know, instead of she wants to go to work. And where it's just, like, there's this general feeling of unease, and it's like housewives who are really unhappy in their lives and don't know how to take time for themselves or express their anger or do what they really want to do. Maybe they're trapped by a religion that's, you know, really problematic. That, to me, that's kind of, and this is sort of someone who's still kind of got a foothold in that space and is saying, oh, look, you can be more free. Here's some things I've learned. Oh, she's one of us, you know, and she's able to do these things. Maybe I can too. That's kind of the vibe that I got from it. But, like, nothing super concrete. Definitely privileged people as well.
There's this section called Permission Slips where she's talking about her sex and sexuality and her marriages. I was going to read a section, but it's hard to grab a soundbite from this without, like, not doing justice. But that's where you wrote, in the margins, Julie wrote, alternative book title, The Feminine Mystique Part 2, quote, you were really just gay all along. And that was my favorite moment of the whole book. Unfortunately, Glennan Doyle did not write that part, but, yeah, Julia's comments when I read a book second are really fun.
Man, that title is way better than the one I just said.
I think another reason why this book was like, oh, this seems a little overhyped, is because, yeah, probably the target audiences, it felt like it was marketed to beyond that target audience.
Yes.
Like, if you were a Glennan Doyle blog reader, like, this is exactly for you. Like, she knows her blog audience and she's writing to them, and I think it's really important for someone who's not going to pick up a book specifically on, like, anti-racism in America, and they're not going to pick up a book on deconstructing white evangelical Christianity. But they are familiar with Glennan Doyle, and they like memoir or self-help, and they pick up this book, and then Glennan Doyle is like, here, come along on my journey, here's some things I've learned. Now, if you've already learned those things, if you're already like, yeah, white evangelical Christianity has some major, major issues, and racism is a truly deep-seated problem in our country that we need to address. If you already have those things, like, you know that, and you're, like, working on it, or that's your lived experience, you're gonna be like, yeah, Glennon, okay. So, all this to say, like, I think she's really hitting her target audience. I think the broad appeal of the book was kind of pushed farther than maybe intended, but at the same time, like, as someone who is a white privileged woman, there are parts that I'm like, yeah, I really feel this, like, especially her conversations about, like, the cages we live in within our gender stereotypes and gender conformity in our culture. Like, she's got some great segments on, like, realizing who you are in your truest, most beautiful self, and not letting yourself be, like, I don't know, bulldozed over for the sake of religion, or for the sake of motherhood, or for the sake of being a wife. Like, that you put your own self before you put all the things you do for other people. Yeah. Because as a woman growing up, like, those things are, like, taught to us. And I really appreciated her, like, saying, yes, these things were taught to you. And your first thought when you say, like, how could that woman do that? And you realize, like, oh, I'm saying that because I've been taught that women shouldn't be brave and courageous and, like, stand up and be themselves fully. Recognizing where that first thought is, like, not what you actually believe, and that you can rewrite those narratives that you've been taught. As a reader, understanding her target audience, I have more grace for it, but the book itself doesn't seem to, like, say who the audience is, and just uses a really broad collective we very often, where I'm like, I am not also a mother. And she doesn't say we as mothers. It's just like, we do this, we do that.
I think that's what bothered me, is, like, I mean, you were talking about the way, when we were prepping, like, the way that this book was marketed even was, like, it was marketed as if this fairly niche audience of, like, upper middle class white evangelical mothers who are starting to deconstruct the constructs of their world has been marketed as the universal experience. And then the majority is then, in the book world, often marketed as niche. So if you are a person of color, a woman of color, honestly, any other queer person besides her, like, you get marketed just to people who are exactly like you. And
it's like you have to find a niche publishing house. Like, you need to find a publisher who wants to do queer literature. You need to find a publisher who wants to do Black stories. Or, like, and that's not all of them, but they've made this niche audience, they as in whoever published this book, and said, this is everyone. All women need to read this book. As if this speaks to all women's experiences, but then also taking books that similarly speak to this same niche audience, but written maybe from a Black woman's perspective, and say, like, oh, we're gonna keep this in, like, the Black literature section, or we're gonna put this only out with the other books about, you know, anti-racism or the Black experience.
Anytime Black Lives Matter is trending on Twitter, then we promote this book. And that's the only time. So you were talking about Austin Channing Brown.
Her book, I'm Still Here, is... we haven't talked about it on the podcast, I don't think.
We've recommended it a lot.
But Austin Channing Brown is specifically writing to people in the church, and even more specifically, white people in the church, to recognize how racism is prevalent in American Christianity. And it is, while it has a broad reach, and especially after, you know, Black Lives Matter, like, really got a lot of attention last year and continues, her book sales went up like crazy. But it, like, it takes those, like, big events.
National tragedies.
Yeah, national tragedies and protests to get that kind of attention to her book, which I would argue has the same niche audience as Glennan Doyle.
Oh, 100%.
But, you know, of course, Glennon's is marketed as, like, this is for all women.
Yeah.
Even though...
It's really not. Because, like, we're grown women. I think we're, like, honestly, college-educated, single, white women in their 20s are, like, who most books are marketed to. Maybe we're the second biggest audience to, like, mothers who feel trapped in their own homes. That is why the novel was created. Go back and listen to our mini-sode. But this did not really... We were very clearly not the target audience for this. And so, yeah. It was very frustrating every single time she said we. And I was like, do not resonate with this at all. But as I finished the book, I sort of came to this place of, like, this is a good book to exist for her audience. That's just not me. And so I made my peace with it. What is this book about?
Yeah, so, as we kind of alluded to, there is the story of Glennan Doyle falling in love with Abby Wambach, ending her marriage to her ex-husband, and mothering her 3 kids in the ways that society has kind of caged her in, or she has caged herself, and, as the title suggests, untaming. Right. Becoming untamed and letting herself be her wild, true self. So, the personal story, I think we can summarize and say is there. But then there's all this other stuff. Yeah. Because it's also about mental health and family and...
meditation?
Yeah, this meditation. The motherhood's a big part of it. Like, what we teach our kids. And again, I use the words, like, what we teach our kids as if I have kids. Right. I don't. I have plants, and as of today, I have worms.
Victoria's a proud worm mom.
I'm a proud worm mom. It's also, I probably should rephrase, I have worms, because it sounds like a disease. I started composting, and I have some pet worms, about 500 of them.
They threw a rager last night.
Yeah, they were all trying to crawl out of the box. They were not keeping to their bedtime. But I digress. So yeah, there's a lot of threads in here. But I guess it does, as I'm saying this all out loud, it does all kind of come back to this idea of wild and free. Like, being untamed. Untamed in your motherhood, untamed in your womanhood, untamed in your sexuality. Untamed in your mental health doesn't sound right, but basically, like, at least from her perspective, dealing with anxiety is, like, not having to control everything, and letting things just be, and realizing that things do just usually work themselves out.
I think maybe when I get stuck on what is this book about, I get stuck a bit in the genre, maybe? Because she writes like a self-help writer, but she markets it as a memoir. And I think that's where I get stuck. Yeah. Is I'm like, I want to hear about what you learned through the story of your life. I don't want you to tell me how to live mine. That's not the reason I read this, you know? And I think I'm not a big fan of self-help in general, but if I read self-help, I want that person to be an expert in their field, or to have read an absurd amount about, like,
you want some footnotes.
I want some footnotes! I want research. I want, like, documented evidence. I want the paragraph, I want the sections that are all about the same topic to be next to each other and to build on each other, you know? Like a well-constructed paragraph. Like, I want a Brené Brown or a Meg J. The Defining Decade is technically a self-help book, but she's like a psychologist who, you know, has a lot of experience and then is, you know, speaking from that experience. This is not that, but she writes that way. Yeah. And I think that's what irks me. Clearly a lot of things have irked me, but I think that's the core of it, is like, this book could have been 10 times more moving with the same lessons, the exact same lessons, if she had tightened it up and just told her story in chronological order. I mean, because I think about, like, Educated, where, like, the truly profound things that you get out of that book by her just telling her story. And, you know, she makes some connections to the past and the future as she's writing it, and to some of the things she's learned, but you get the things she's learned at the end of the chapter after she learns it. No pretense of, I am a spiritual teacher here to bestow my knowledge upon you. Glennan Doyle is, like, fresh out of the womb when it comes to meditation and, like, deconstruction and shame work, like, but she's then teaching me about it. It's like, that irks me a lot. So when it comes to, like, what is this book about, I think that's what it comes down to.
When I was thinking about, like, okay, what is this book and what do I want it to be?
Yes.
I kept going back to Donald Miller's style of writing in a lot of his memoir, but especially Scary Close, because that one, similarly, is a story of falling in love and a story about relationships. Different. Glennon Doyle's more about herself and what she learned through it, but Donald Miller introduces you to, here's the woman that I ended up falling in love with. And then he goes on his whole journey, and he, you know, does flashbacks. He talks about where he was at the end of his previous relationship, where he was at a really bad place, and, like, the people who helped him along the way. And kind of like you were mentioning with other memoirs, you kind of get that, like, nugget of wisdom kind of at the end of each story. And I think he does a great job tying a lot of smaller stories together. To build into this
thematically.
Thematically. Then you touch on all these things that he learned about relationships through things like therapy. And he doesn't posture as a therapist or a spiritual teacher, but he's like, here's what I learned through this therapy program. Here's what I learned through my faith. Now, I don't always agree with all his conclusions. And we've addressed that on the episode we did about Scary Close, but I think that's what I wanted Glennon to do with hers. Was say, here's the story of how I fell in love. I'm going to take you through the whole thing and all the things I learned along the way, and there's going to be this payoff like you were reading a novel. When you get to the end. There's some bit that you didn't know yet, whether it's the wedding or it's the sitting at the soccer game with her quote-unquote blended. It's just a family, but like, as people call it, a blended family, and having that, you know, wonderful interaction. And we're, like, kind of there. We kind of get the bookends, but we don't really get back to this. There's no through line. There's just bookends when it comes to the personal story part. So, And the story, like, human beings, we are storytelling animals. Story is where we get our meaning and our purpose, and, like, that's how we learn things. We don't learn things because someone explains it to us. We learn it because of a story. And I feel like this book was really a missed opportunity, because, like, her life is an amazing story, and I think she really sold herself short. And I think she is a good writer if she had a better editor who could, you know, say, okay, Glennon, this is too many metaphors in one chapter. No one's going to be able to follow this. You need to pick one. And, or like, okay, how about we take all these sections about parenting and put them in a parenting section? Or how about we have a parenting chapter? Or whatever. I, like, left feeling, kind of disappointed and feeling like I don't know exactly what I just read, but I know what I wanted to read. I really wanted exactly what I was told the book was, you know? So, false advertising, unfortunately. There's a really beautiful story towards the end where she is reflecting back on when her and Abby were not yet together, but emailing. And Abby wrote this beautiful, like, I see us someday, like, sitting down on a dock, overlooking the water, with the fish jumping, and you bring us coffee. Also, I love the fact that they named the dock at their house, because they live along the Gulf of Mexico. The Doyle Melton Wam Dock. Instead of Wambach.
Wambach!
It's the Wam Dock.
The Wam Dock! fuck? Oh my god, I missed that.
And she basically gets to live that experience, and she talks about how they didn't just, like, fall into this. They, like, this is the life they imagined for themselves, and they made it happen. I think that could have been a beautiful, longer payoff than just that one section. Like, if she would have introduced that chronologically of, like, and so you got the email message of, like, I imagine this is us, and during that, like, will they, won't they time of their love story, and then you get the payoff at the very end of the book where they have the moment, and
it
you're
would have
like,
been so beautiful!
Oh, this is what they wanted, this is what they planned, and you could see the journey they went on.
Yeah.
So when she says, our life doesn't just look perfect because we happen to live this way. We planned it, and then you would have the payoff of you've seen all the struggles she's been through, all the learning she had to do, all the coming to terms with herself and letting go, and just, like, being her, like, wild, beautiful, untamed self, to then have that payoff moment. I think, like, it would have been so much more satisfying, even though it was a beautiful chapter.
Right.
If it was a blog post on its own, you'd be happy with it. But within the context of the book, I think you can make this story, like, go a little farther.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did want to read one of my favorite sections, and I think it's my favorite because it's so short.
Yeah.
And this is what I think so much of the book could have been.
Okay.
Lies. My friend and I are lying on the couch, marveling, crying, and laughing about all we've let burn and we built during the past couple years of our lives. When I say, then I left my family, she stops laughing. She says, don't say that. Don't say things about yourself that aren't true. You didn't leave your family, not for a single moment. You didn't even leave your husband, for God's sake. You left your marriage. That's it. That's what you left. And that's what you had to leave to create your true family. Please don't ever let me hear you say, I left my family again. Be careful with the stories you tell about yourself. That moment, I dog-eared the page, I, stopped. Yeah. And because it's only in, 2 paragraphs within the page, there's a lot of white space. And I think if she wanted to write in those, short vignettes, to let the story of it stand by itself. I think this one also rings truer to me because it's her friend saying it to her instead of Glennon just saying it.
There's no extra explanation around it.
You don't need to tell me what that means or what that could mean for me. Yeah. I read that and I'm like, oh, you're right. Yeah. And then I sit and think about the friends who call me out on my bullshit. Yeah. And the things that I say that's like, why did I say that? That's not true. Yeah.
Listening to you read that, I just sort of mourn the book that could have been. Because she's a great writer! And she has an amazing story to tell! And she did herself a real disservice.
When we were prepping for this episode, my partner in the other room was on a call, and he says loudly, let's not let our dreams be dreams. And I wrote it down, and I'll ask him before we release this if I'm allowed to keep it in. But that's how I feel about this book.
It was such a perfect moment.
Because it's perfectly what this book is. Don't let your dreams be dreams. But I'm also like Glennan Doyle. Do not let your dream of what this book could be just be a dream. Yeah. Make this book what it should be. Or what it could be.
He was on a work call and he said that, which made it even better.
So anyway. Don't let your dreams be dreams.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is one thing, even if it's small, from Glennan Doyle that you were like, okay, I actually would take this with me?
I don't know if it's something I learned from her, but I think something that a strong point of the book is her relationship to her daughter, Tish, in particular. She's sort of undoing the cycle of the way that mothers teach femininity to their daughters. I just think about my own family and how my, extended family, you know what I mean? And how for generations there's been this expectation that, the women do everything and they take care of everyone else. Everything is your job if you're a woman. And that was never explained to me, but it's just that's what I got from it. And, I figured that out a while ago, and it takes a long time to unlearn. Yeah, I really, that was something that I appreciated about the book that I thought she did well, was, realizing that taking responsibility for her own happiness rather than forcing her kids to make her happy is actually doing them a great service and freeing up their lives to be their own instead of hers.
Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff on parenthood, like, stuck with me as someone who hopes to someday be a parent, but then also one of my clients is a parenting resource, so I soak in all the parenting information these days.
All of the, like, vaccine-related data that Victoria sends is through a parenting blog or, like, newsletter.
Yeah, when my roommates and I are deciding, like, you know, what is risk, like, how do we assess risk with COVID? I'm like, well, here's what this parent blog is talking about. That aside, recognizing and naming how much the martyrdom of motherhood is revered in our culture.
Yeah.
And how I've seen it play out in the women in my life, and how by naming it and identifying it and looking to the mothers who are walking the steps ahead of me, my colleagues and peers and family members, that so hopefully when I have the opportunity to be a parent myself, I can learn from them and continue to unpack that for myself. So like you said, it doesn't become an expectation on the next generation as well. And being able to say to peers in my life and my own mom and my own family members who are parents to be like, you don't have to do everything. Like, you don't have to put everything in front of your kid. Yeah. Or you don't have to put your kid in front of everything. Sorry, that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Maybe if this was marketed as a parenting book, it would have worked. Because maybe the people who are parents would get the most cohesive story out of it.
And it's written in a way that might be more conducive to their reading style, which is, I have 5 minutes to myself ever, because I have small humans running around. When you only have a few minutes to read a couple chapters here and there, it's probably a good fit.
Yeah.
Okay, so any other... I feel like a lot of this episode has been shout-outs and shutdowns.
Yeah.
My only other... I had a couple others. My only other, like, shutdown, really, is the whole idea of touch trees. She, like, comes back to it multiple times, and I never quite understood the metaphor in the first place.
Yeah, me neither.
So I was like, just chop everything about the touch trees, because I don't understand.
Yeah.
What the metaphor...
Chop the touch trees.
Yeah. Pull out your axes.
I also appreciated that she addressed... Because she was so focused on raising her daughters as feminists that she forgot, like, about her son a little bit. And there was a chapter where she talked about, like, how when she drives her son and his friends around, she, like, asks them, you know, pointed questions and, like, asks them about their feelings and is, like, trying to raise her son as a feminist as well in everything that implies, in the sense of, like, we don't have to hold men to this impossible gender standard either. And so I really appreciated that she, like, acknowledged that she sort of, it didn't occur to her at first, and that she, like, made a point to include that in her life. I thought that was really important. Really, the thing that made me angriest was that she said her sexuality was a choice. There's just one chapter that just is like a bomb in the middle of the book where she's just like, I think the what she was trying to say was like, I don't have to explain myself to you. Like, I don't owe you a label. I think is what she was trying to say. But what she said was, essentially, sexuality is a choice and women are better. So that's what I've decided on. And I was like, okay. It just, yeah, it made me very angry. And I was like, did you have any other queer person read this? Did your wife read this chapter before you released it? I don't know.
I guess
I had a lot of questions about that chapter.
I know I read that chapter before I read any of the book because you were like, I have problems with this.
Yeah, I was very upset.
I can't speak for her. Obviously, my read, I guess, was like, I could choose to deny myself, to live caged and unhappy, and that is a choice. And so, like, I'm choosing to live my most honest expression of myself, where I'm the happiest. And don't feel bad for me. Like, there was another section where she writes about how she really, like, it really irks her when the response to someone coming out is like, we love you anyways.
Yeah.
Or we love you no matter what. Because you're like, you wouldn't, this isn't something for you to lament about me. Like, this is something to be excited about. And, like, come alongside with me and be, yeah, that's part of your life. You're being your honest, true self. Now, ultimately, I think I agree with you. I think some other eyes on that chapter where she's saying, like, I'm not born this way, I chose this, kind of. Yeah. Like, it just feels messy, and maybe there's a way she could have said it that, like, again, getting away from the we. Like, I'm speaking on behalf of other people. Yeah. But of, like, I'm just speaking for myself here.
Right. I mean, yeah, because, like, leaving her marriage for a woman, you know, when she's been raised in a culture and environment that would disapprove of that on multiple levels, like, that's a big choice. But yeah, she definitely should have explained that more or differently, or just not said it in those words, but, you know, again, shown us. Like that, it really left a bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah.
Oh, there's also a really sweet moment. There's a sweet moment that really convinced me that, like, this is an important book for Christian moms to read, because she's, like, on her book tour, she's doing an event in a church, and this grandma who's, like, wearing, like, a pride shirt or something, like a handmade whatever shirt. Like, she clearly has queer grandchildren, right? And she stands up and she's like, I don't know how to ask this, but it feels like suddenly everyone's gay, and I don't understand why. She feels kind of overwhelmed by, like, suddenly all these people are coming out, and even you, who was, like, fighting for her, you know, whatever. And she's like, I don't understand. And Glennan Doyle's response is full of compassion and love, and she's like, I can see you trying really hard to be a supportive grandparent, and I want to support you in that, and I'm just gonna explain that, like, it's because we can. You know what I mean? Like, people are coming out in what it seems like a lot more, you know, suddenly, oh, everyone's queer now. Well, it's because you're not gonna get killed or arrested or whatever for it. As stigma lifts, people feel free to be open about themselves and whatever, right? So she kind of explains that, and I was like, this is a very, very important chapter for Christian moms, families, grandparents, whatever, who are, like, not totally against it, but they just feel very overwhelmed by the sort of queer culture, and they're like, there's so much that I don't know, and I'm kind of terrified, but I want to be there for my kid. What do I do? I felt like that was a good chapter for them to have. Yeah. So there were good things about it. There were good things about this book.
Yes.
I wanted to end on a positive note.
Yeah. There were, definitely good stuff. And while we, you know, teased Glennan Doyle for having so many metaphors, I think her metaphor in that chapter specifically was actually really helpful and beautiful. Mm-hmm. And of, like, how she was talking about, like, we're all the sea, we're all water, and we have to, like, pour ourselves into a glass of, like, I am straight, and then there was one for I am gay, and then they were like, there's people that were like, oh, none of these glasses work for me, and someone's like, okay, well, here's another one, and they're like, oh, yeah, and then that's theirs, and then some people are like, well, that one doesn't really work for me, so then you have all these different ones, and you have the whole LGBTQIA plus community, right, because we need things that work for us. But then she's like, ideally, we're in a world where we don't have to have those glasses, we can all just exist as the sea together. And it was, I don't know, it was very beautiful, like, identifying, like, the process of, like, where we got to where we are and why it's helpful, and also, like, you know, ultimately, wouldn't it be nice if we lived in a beautiful society where, like, you didn't have to pigeonhole people? at all, and people just be freely themselves. But while we have labels, they are helpful for representation and making people feel like they have a space and they can be accepted. And like you were saying, once the stigma begins to lift even slightly, and more people feel comfortable expressing themselves truly. So, for people who read this book and maybe they want to dive deeper into certain topics that are brought up, what would you recommend? I know we kind of gave ourselves some categories. Let's start with faith deconstruction.
Faith deconstruction, This by Michael Gungor. That is the title of the book. The book is called This. It's a more dramatic deconstruction than others, but it's my favorite, so that's what I'm gonna recommend.
There's a lot of great podcasts out there, all different stages of deconstruction. So the Liturgist podcast can be a great entry point, has kind of gone through all the different stages of deconstruction and then kind of rebuilding something that feels more true to them. Literally anything with Kevin Garcia. Just look up Kevin Garcia, they are a wonderful spiritual teacher and queer leader in the faith community. So look up anything they've guested on, any podcasts they've guested on. They have their own podcasts. Definitely recommend that. Okay, let's talk about, we didn't really mention it too much in the episode, but Glennan Doyle does have a whole chapter on racism, and that's more in depth than her other chapters. That's a bit longer. But if you wanted to read more about confronting racism in America, working towards anti-racism, we mentioned I'm Still Here by Austin Channing Brown, more specifically geared to the Christian audience. In addition, we've recommended before podcasts as well as online resources, White Homework by Tori Williams Douglas, again geared towards a white audience.
Another anti-racist activist, Andre Henry, has a podcast called Hope and Hard Pills, and he also has a newsletter. If you're more of a blog person, I imagine, if you're reading this book.
For conversations about gender and sexuality.
I mean, Shameless by Nadia Bolz-Weber.
Dun, 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 dun.
Obviously.
Obviously. There's so much great feminist writing out there. I haven't finished it yet, but we've plugged it so much on this podcast. Invisible Women. If you are looking more from a structural standpoint, how the world is biased against women, it's been super eye-opening for me. Definitely a different feel than this memoir, but yeah, good stuff. Motherhood and parenting. I guess this kind of goes with gender and sexuality as well, but Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. She's got a whole section in there on how shame is culturally different for women and men, and then a whole section at the end addressing parenting and how you can raise your children to be, in Brene Brown's words, wholehearted.
Oh, I just, Mother's Daughters and Body Image by Hilary McBride. I would say specifically regarding mothers and daughters, obviously, and how shame either does or doesn't get passed down, and kind of relationships specifically to their bodies. That's a great one.
Yeah.
Currently obsessed?
Oh my gosh, I didn't even prepare mine. You go first.
Okay. So, mine's all music.
These are the things that are bringing us joy right now.
Yes. Lots of music is bringing me joy. So there's an artist called Nive. I'm pretty sure is how it's spelled. Pronounced Nive. He's got a song called Tired. And as someone with chronic fatigue, it really speaks to my soul. It's a great song. The indie singer-songwriter from Mexico, Natalia Lafourcade. This is an old album from like 4 or 5 years ago, but Hasta la Raíz is an incredible album. The deluxe one in particular, I've been listening to that a lot. And then the rapper Propaganda has a new, I don't know if it's an album or an EP. It's kind of short. It's like 6 songs, but it's called Terraform the People. And I like it best of all his stuff so far. It's very, very good.
There is a podcast called Hidden Brain on NPR, and there's an episode called The Easiest Person to Fool with psychologist Adam Grant as the guest on that one, and found it super fascinating. Yeah, basically when we challenge our deeply held beliefs, how does it help us work with other people better and understand ourselves better? And the other music I've been bopping to, I finally made a playlist for myself. I haven't done that in a long time. Just throw a bunch of stuff I'm loving. Yeah, it's kind of old, but the Super Bloom album from Mr. Wives. Oh, so good.
So good.
Yeah, I think I have it stuck in my head at least 4 times a day, and then I have to play Super Bloom so I can scream, I deserve congratulations.
Yeah.
I came out the other side.
Yeah.
Which also seems like a very fitting song for this book.
Yeah. Oh, I really want to listen to that album, specifically that song, after I get my last vaccine.
Yeah!
Because it's like, you know, I mean, it's technically a breakup album, but, you know, it's about, like, you go through this really dark place, and then you're sort of getting planted in the ground, and then you...
Super Bloom.
Super Bloom! And you just, that song at the end, you feel so triumphant.
Yes.
It's a good one. All right. Well, I should have filtered out the sound of the constant sound of the helicopter.
This has been a dedicated helicopter. He's been here for an hour and a half.
He's so dedicated. So hopefully I got that out of there. But if not, apologies. Yeah, we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Book Club with Julia and Victoria. Chime in with your own thoughts and recommendations on Instagram at bookclubwithjv or through the contact form on our website, www.bookclubwithjv.com. Our website is also where you can find show notes for this episode, which include links to any of the recommendations we gave or other tidbits we mentioned. Make sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're currently listening, and leave us a 5-star review on Apple while you're there. This episode was co-hosted and produced by myself, Victoria Bruick, along with Julia Clausen. Our music is composed by Greg Bruick. Our logo was designed by Gabby Febland, and Rebecca Gesney is our project manager. We'll catch you all on our next episode. Happy reading!